Avengers! Assemble.
Everyone remembers that moment, but it almost never happened, because for a time, these heroes were disassembled, sold off one by one as Marvel was near death. And with great struggle comes great opportunity. But the ones who saw that opportunity, bigger villains than Thanos himself, didn't wear capes, they wore suits and chewed cigars. And if one big gamble hadn't paid off, the MCU would have been snapped into dust. So let's rewind to the 90s, which by the way is the greatest decade ever, and I'll fight anyone on that. But it's also a gold rush for comics. Trading cards were booming, collectibles were hot, Marvel's toy line was crushing it, thanks to a deal with Toy Biz, run by two guys you'll need to remember for later, Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad. And then there were the cartoons, pulling in millions of viewers and brought Marvel characters to life for kids on Saturday mornings. During this time, Marvel stock went from under $5 a share to over $35. It looked like another golden age, but good times can't last forever. Enter Ronald Perlman, a billionaire, owner of Revlon, and Marvel's majority shareholder, and someone who couldn't care less about superheroes. To him, Marvel was just a cash cow ready to milk. Under his control, Marvel expanded recklessly, acquiring trading card companies, launching multiple comic book lines, and flooding stores with expensive variants. And the strategy was simple: make a lot of money as fast as possible. But bubbles always burst, and when the collectibles market crashed, so did Marvel's stock. Shares once worth $35.75 in '93 had sunk to just over $2 3 years later. A lot of comic book shops had shut down due to unsold inventory. It was just an oversaturated market. Marvel Comics had survived the World War in the 40s, the comic book culture war of the 50s, but by the 90s, it was probably the lowest point in its company history, as it was fighting just to survive. Headlines about its financial troubles dominated the news. Perlman's greedy strategy almost nuked the company, but he wasn't done. He had a final move. He actually pushed Marvel into bankruptcy on purpose. Why? Because he thought it would give him even more control over Marvel. December 27th, 1996. Marvel files for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Perlman thinks he's being clever, restructure the company, keep the brand, take total control. But it backfires, because the bankruptcy triggers an all-out corporate war. In one corner, Ronald Perlman, the man who drove Marvel into the ground, desperate to keep control. In the other corner, Carl Icahn, another notorious corporate raider proposing his own restructuring plan to take Marvel for himself. And quietly calculating their own takeover in the background, Isaac Ike Perlmutter and Avi Arad, owners of Toy Biz, Marvel's longtime toy partner. Avi was also a power broker in Hollywood, who signed a Blade deal with New Line Cinema in the mid-90s. And, unlike the other suits, he was a devoted Marvel fan and loved the characters. Maybe a little too much. But Ike Perlmutter? How can you even describe this guy? He was silent, cold, a little racist, and very cheap. More on him later. So while Perlman and Icahn fight each other in court, Avi and Ike secretly plan their move. Icahn gets the upper hand and makes a power move against Perlman. He buys Marvel's bonds for cheap, and buys enough to gain control to eventually kick Perlman out. Icahn thinks he won control over Marvel, but that doesn't last long because Avi and Ike quietly gained favor with Marvel's creditors and offered them a simple deal: merge Marvel with Toy Biz. You cut costs and save the company. The creditors liked their deal better and they bought it, and the court approved it. December 1998. The merger between Marvel Entertainment Group and Toy Biz is finalized, and Marvel officially exits from Chapter 11 bankruptcy. 2 years of lawsuits, boardroom battles, and bankruptcy moves finally ends. Perlman thought filing for bankruptcy would give him total control, and Icahn thought he could take control from Perlman. Instead, it blew up in both of their faces. In the end, Marvel belonged to two toy executives who had never published a comic or produced a film. But they didn't exactly get an entertainment giant. They got a legendary comic book brand, sure, but it was on its deathbed. Bankruptcy meant only one thing: survive at any cost. Under Avi and Ike, Marvel made a desperate choice. They didn't sell off comic books. They sold the movie rights to their biggest heroes for pennies on the dollar. And these were deals that would haunt the company for decades. And as mentioned, Blade was already the first to go. AV brokered a deal with New Line Cinema to adapt the half-vampire antihero, a character that most casual fans had never even heard of. And Marvel handed over those rights for just $25,000, plus a small slice of the profits. In 1998, Blade becomes a surprise hit, earning over $130 million worldwide on a $45 million budget. It proves something that no one expected. Marvel characters could dominate the big screen, and Hollywood took notice. So Marvel, they started selling. The most heartbreaking of all, Spider-Man. Marvel sold his film rights to Sony for just $7 million. That deal gave Sony full control over one of the most valuable characters in pop culture history. And the fine print, as long as Sony releases a Spider-Man related movie every 5 years and 9 months, they keep those rights forever. Which is why you tend to see a lot of Spider-Man universe slop from Sony. But Spider-Man wasn't the only hero Marvel sold off during this financial crisis. The Hulk was licensed to Universal Pictures. While Marvel retained production rights, Universal held distribution rights for solo Hulk films, limiting Marvel's ability to explore standalone stories. That deal, just $1.5 million. 20th Century Fox scooped up the X-Men for around $2.6 million, which also included the rights to Deadpool, Fantastic Four for $1.25 million, and Daredevil for just under $1 million. In total, a handful of Hollywood studios walked away with Marvel's crown jewels for the price of a mid-budget indie film. And those studios cashed in big. Spider-Man would go on to generate over $8 billion in box office revenue for Sony. Sony also cashed in on exclusive Spider-Man games for their PlayStation division. In fact, Spider-Man is so important to PlayStation, it's a main driver for console sales. The franchise has sold over 50 million copies and generated several $billion. Hell, Sony even used the Spider-Man font on its PS3. That's how important Spidey is to Sony. The X-Men franchise alone would eventually earn Fox over $6 billion. But for Marvel, the damage of these deals hurt them financially and creatively. Now, these weren't simple licenses, they were long-term contracts with renewal clauses, meaning Marvel signed them away with the chance of never getting them back. Marvel characters that built the company legacy locked up in these studio contracts. Now, at the time, it sort of worked on paper. Quick cash to keep the company alive. But looking back now, it smashed any chance for Marvel's universe before it even had a chance to get started. Spider-Man and the Avengers couldn't share the same screen. The X-Men locked in their own cinematic world. And the same went for the Fantastic Four. So yeah, they were trying to survive, but they also gave away the very heroes that could have saved them. By 1998, Marvel was alive, just barely. They had toy deals, some comics, and buzz from the Blade movie, but all their A-listers were gone. This may sound wild now, but Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, these were considered B-listers, characters that Hollywood had written off, and for good reason. What Marvel didn't have were its best-selling icons, the ones that built the company. No Hulk, no Spider-Man, no X-Men, no Fantastic Four. Yeah, sure, they were technically still Marvels on paper, but in theaters, they belonged to a few Hollywood studios that had no intention of giving them back. Marvel watched as other studios made billions off their characters. X-Men hit theaters in 2000 and became a surprise hit. Then Spider-Man, directed by Sam Raimi, smashed records in 2002, pulling over $800 million worldwide. Those were Marvel characters, and they weren't seeing much of the money, so they had to do something drastic. If they couldn't get their stars back, they'd turn those B-team players into icons, not by licensing, but by making the movies themselves. In 2005, they took a big gamble and officially formed Marvel Studios. They had no filmmaking experience, no distribution network, no track record in Hollywood. They were a comic book company trying to compete with Sony, Fox, and Universal. They secured $525 million in financing. Ironically, it was the same amount that Ron Perlman had sought in Bankruptcy. And then they needed someone who could lead all of this. Someone who knew comics, knew film, and knew how to connect the two. Enter Kevin Feige. At the time, Feige was a young producer who had worked behind the scenes on the X-Men and Spider-Man films for other studios. But he wasn't just a logistics guy, he was a fan, a comic book nerd with a producer's mind. And he had a vision. Feige saw potential not just in the solo films, but in creating something that no one had ever done before, a shared cinematic universe. A connected world, just like the comics, but on screen. and he was about to get his chance. The plan was bold. Marvel was going to finance its own movies, control the creative process, and, most important, keep the profits. No more handouts, no more licensing deals. They were betting on themselves, and for their first movie, they picked Iron Man. A character, now let's be honest, most people outside the comic book world had barely heard of. He wasn't Spider-Man, and he wasn't Wolverine. He was a second-tier hero with zero box office track record. Marvel's next move was another gamble, hiring Jon Favreau to direct. You see, before Iron Man and The Mandalorian, Favreau was best known for indie comedies like Swingers.
I'm gonna ask you a simple question. I want you to listen to me. Who's the big winner here tonight at the casino? Huh? Mikey, that's who. Mikey's the big winner. Mikey wins.
But the real gamble, though, was casting Robert Downey Jr. Sure, he was a gifted actor, but his public battles with addiction, his multiple arrests, and prison and rehab stints made him uninsurable. Studios wouldn't touch him. There were even rumors that Tom Cruise had once been considered for the role. He was the safe bet, the proven star. But Feige and Favreau didn't want safe, they wanted real. What they saw in Downey was basically Tony Stark, flawed, magnetic, and charismatic. Ironically, even the tight-fisted Ike Perlmutter approved the casting. Now, it wasn't because he knew anything about talent, but because Downey, he came cheap. And when Downey, well, at least at the time, and when Downey did his screen test as Tony Stark, it became clear he was Iron Man.
My old man had a philosophy. Peace by definition means having a bigger stick than the other guy, so I feed the good dog. We arm the good guys because you can be sure as shit someone's arming the bad guys. Tell me, Rhodey, if you were me, would you sit on the sidelines? Could you live with yourself if you did? I know you. Yeah, that's right. You'd do something about it too. It's not.
But the actual production wasn't as smooth as that screen test. Everything that could go wrong did go wrong. Script problems, budget overruns, studio interference, and because this was Marvel's first self-financed movie, every single dollar mattered. Ike Perlmutter, who again famously cheap, even questioned the cost of snacks, trying to cut the catering budget mid-production. Kevin Feige later admitted he was afraid Iron Man might never make it to theaters. The film even began filming without a finished script. Much of the dialogue, especially between Downey and co-star Jeff Bridges, was improvised on the spot.
We'd show up for the day's work, not knowing what we were going to shoot. All the guys are in the studio tapping their foot, looking at the watch, and we're in my trailer trying to figure out our lines, man,
On the day.
On the day. Downey's saying, you try my part, I'll try your part. Favreau calling up writer friends he knows. Now here's this scene, what do you think? This is the day.
Shit.
And it's driving me crazy.
Oh,
I'm
man,
pissed, I said.
May 2nd, 2008. Iron Man premieres and took in over $100 million on its opening weekend, and eventually rakes in $585 million worldwide. Marvel was finally in charge. No more begging studios for input, no more compromises. And then came the post-credits scene that changed Hollywood forever.
Jarvis.
Welcome, Holmes.
I am Iron Man. You think you're the only superhero in the world? Mr. Stark, you become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet. Who the hell are you? Nick Fury, director of S.H.I.E.L.D.
Oh.
I'm here to talk to you about the Avenger Initiative.
And just a month later, The Incredible Hulk releases. The MCU had 2 entries, and both made money. Technically, The Incredible Hulk was Marvel Studios' second film, but Universal still held the distribution rights, thanks to that old licensing deal. Marvel owned the character, but couldn't release Hulk solo movies without Universal's cut. That deal is why we haven't seen a proper solo Hulk film since 2008, and why unfortunately Marvel had to be forced into kind of shifting him into a sidekick character in other movies and TV shows. December 31st, 2009. Disney buys Marvel for $4.24 billion. On New Year's Eve, the House of Ideas officially joins the House of Mouse.
We plan to use all of Disney's global distribution and marketing resources to extend and increase the popularity of the Marvel brand and its treasure trove of over 5,000 characters. And in doing that, we think we can significantly build both businesses and make the sum of our parts even stronger.
In just 11 years, Marvel went from bankruptcy to a billion-dollar acquisition. And they proved that with the right story, even lesser-known heroes could become global icons. And also it helps that they struck gold with the casting of Downey, who set the tone for the MCU, but they also really nailed the rest of the castings in those early years. Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, each success built on the last. And by 2012, that connected universe that Kevin Feige had always dreamed of finally came to life in the form of the Avengers, coming together for a $1.5 billion worldwide global phenomenon. Characters that other studios had rejected were now the most bankable names in Hollywood. Marvel had won, or so it seemed. Kevin Feige, the creative visionary, was constantly butting heads with Ike Perlmutter, because the truth was, they hadn't escaped the villain, they just replaced him. Sure, Perlman was gone, but Ike Perlmutter? He was worse. Much worse. Perlmutter was ruthless, obsessed with control, and known for extreme penny pinching. He berated employees for leaving lights on, counted how many paper clips people used, he even monitored who drank too much soda from the office fridge. One former exec asked for a new pencil, and Perlmutter refused, saying, "It still writes." But worse than that were the things he said. Perlmutter refused to make films with black or female leads, insisting they didn't sell. He told writers to cut female characters from scripts because women don't sell toys. And he allegedly said swapping Terrence Howard for Don Cheadle in Iron Man 2 wouldn't matter because, quote, black people look the same. And those movies he fought against, like Black Panther and Captain Marvel, ended up bringing in billions at the box office. By 2015, the tension between Ike Perlmutter and Kevin Feige started to boil over. Perlmutter refused to pay Robert Downey Jr.'s salary for Captain America: Civil War, and demanded they cut Iron Man from the movie entirely.
The Avengers stuff was always really kind of this colossal ambitious thing, but to me, the Civil War was the kind of, it was the smart, sexy Marvel idea, you know? A rift between two characters that you kind of, you don't want to see them, you want to see them, you know, some friction, but you don't want to see this tear in the fabric of the relationships because you know how pervasive it could be.
Now imagine Civil War without the iconic Cap versus Iron Man showdown. Well, Ike Perlmutter could, because for him, saving money mattered more than anything. Feige had enough, and he pushed back. And unbelievably, Perlmutter tried to fire him. So you had on one side Ike Perlmutter, a penny-pinching bigot, a creative vacuum, feared and hated by employees that ran Marvel like a spreadsheet, and on the other, Kevin Feige, a soft-spoken, fan-first comic nerd who turned B-level heroes into a billion-dollar empire. And when it all came to a head, the choice was obvious. Disney CEO Bob Iger stepped in, and Perlmutter was snapped out of existence. Today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe has earned over $30 billion at the box office. Add another $3 billion in for digital video, another $15 billion in merchandising and video games. In total, roughly $50 billion in revenue. And it all started with a single gamble in 2008, Iron Man, which alone is now worth more than Marvel's entire bankruptcy package of $525 million. But the desperation bankruptcy deals from the 90s still existed. For years, Fox held on to the X-Men, Deadpool, and Fantastic Four movie rights. That is until Disney's massive acquisition in 2019, bringing those characters finally home.
That breaking news, the blockbuster Disney deal, the parent company of ABC buying many of the assets of 21st Century Fox, creating an entertainment giant.
Now that's all well and good, but Sony still owns the film rights to Spider-Man 2 this day, which I'm sure Marvel would love to have back. But in 2014, The Amazing Spider-Man 2 underwhelmed. You know what? Even though his Spider-Man movies weren't that great, Andrew Garfield, in my opinion, was the best Spider-Man. Don't rip me too hard in the comments. I said what I said. Sony panicked. They wanted some of that Avengers rub, so they came to the table, and what followed was a shared custody deal. Marvel Studios, under Kevin Feige, would take creative control of Spider-Man within the MCU, and Sony would retain the distribution rights. And in 2016, Captain America: Civil War finally brought Spider-Man home to the MCU.
Underoos!
Nice job, kid.
Thanks. Well, I could have stuck the landing a little better. It's just a new suit. Wait, it's nothing. Mr. Stark, it's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, we don't really need to start a conversation.
Okay. Captain? Big fan of Spider-Man?
Yeah, we'll talk about it later. Just,
Hey, everyone.
good job.
Under Kevin Feige's leadership, Marvel Studios built a tightly connected film and TV universe of heroes, villains, sidekicks, stories, characters, and crossovers that Hollywood studios and their comic rival DC would spend the next decade trying to copy. Creatively, it's not easy to pull off, but they've managed to do it for the last 17 years and counting. Marvel took a gamble and it turned into one of the most successful entertainment franchises in history. And yes, there's been problems lately with superhero fatigue, box office misses, and poor creative choices, but the fact remains, if Iron Man bombed at the box office in 2008, we're talking about a very different timeline. No Captain America, no Avengers, no billion-dollar box office, no pop cultural dominance, maybe no Marvel at all. But they bet on themselves and they won. And let's not forget about Ronald Perlman, who strangely enough, because of his greed, accidentally set the whole thing in motion. Because by the late 2000s, comic sales were already falling. Today, physical comics barely sell. What used to be Marvel's bread and butter is now just a niche collector's market. But the real product is everything else. Movies, merchandising, video game licensing, theme parks, and streaming. The Marvel empire that nearly died has become one of the biggest and most successful entertainment franchises in history. And it all started with the bankruptcy filing on December 27th, 1996.